NDCs broaden their focus, and include LDCs, then they will become more inclusive and more effective. As an example, I am highlighting India's NDC here, which has 4 main key points to it. And if you think about it, you will realize that all 4 of them are about mitigation. In the India pavilion, you will see a lot of information about the last point which was added in when the NDC was updated, which is about lifestyle for environment. But if you unpack it, it is all about people taking action for reducing emissions. It is again all about mitigation. The first 3 are big ticket items, whereas the 4th one is something that people have to undertake. But that is our reading of this NDC, and I'm sure this is the case with many other NDCs also, that the mitigation actions are primarily policy focused and large business focused. The India NDC is highlighting the link between lifestyle and mitigation, but what about the link between lifestyle and adaptation? In order to combat the impacts of climate change, also people have to change the way they live. But that is not being mentioned anywhere. And there is absolutely no mention about resilience building and disaster protection for vulnerable communities. And this is just one example which I am taking here. You look at the NDC of many countries, you will see the same thing. So we decided to do something about it in India through our network. And we started talking to people and collecting these case studies of LDC, locally developed actions, locally developed choices, which can contribute to NDCs. We are developing a campaign to propagate these case studies, and we will also undertake policy advocacy. When we started talking to people outside India, we realized that it is resonating with other developing countries also. And recently we conducted our first international engagement on this topic in the form of Climate Proofing South Asia, which was a e-conference which was quite successful and generated a lot of interesting discussion. So we want to continue engaging with this topic within India as well as across South Asia, and taking it beyond to other developing countries also. Today, some of these cases will be highlighted by my fellow speakers. I am going to be followed by Myron Mendes, my colleague who is the facilitator of INEC, followed by Nakul Sharma from Kansa, India, and finally we will have Martin Vos, who will talk about some research that has happened around how these local initiatives can be financed. He represents German Watch. So I hope that at the end of these presentations, all of you will also agree with us and will be partnering with us to make NDCs more people-centric. If you want to know more about our network, you can visit our website or drop an email to Myron. His email address is there. So now I invite Myron to come up here to present his talk.
Thanks Priya. Good evening to all of you. My name is Myron. I am the National Facilitator for the Indian Network on Ethics and Climate Change, and also closely associated with LIA, which is the Secretariat for the network. So let me take you away from Sharm el-Sheikh and Egypt and take you to a very, very remote location in a state called Andhra Pradesh in India. And this is the community that we work with in Andhra Pradesh. This story of change is about building community resilience in a climate changing environment set in a remote indigenous, or as we call it, Adivasi area of Andhra Pradesh. This entire area is very remote but rich in natural resources like land, water and forests. Indigenous communities in this region primarily depend on agriculture and to some extent collection of non-timber forest produce for their livelihoods. Agriculture, however, is mostly limited to the Kharif season from June to September, which is also the monsoon season. The second cycle of operations is difficult as the area is rain-fed and has limited access to water for irrigation. Cash incomes come from government promoted schemes. Subsidized food and daily rations are made available on a monthly basis through the government public distribution system. The livelihood systems of these communities is becoming much more dependent on the government because of the doles and giveaways, and thus denying these communities from developing the skills and capacity for becoming increasingly self-resilient and reliant. On the other hand, we have the ecological situation, which is increasingly becoming a matter of concern. The climate crisis is compounding the existing socio-economic vulnerabilities of these Adivasi communities or indigenous communities. It is well known, ironically, that the impacts of climate change affect those who are the most marginalized and who have the least contribution to the problem of climate change. The variation in the climate has a direct adverse impact on the livelihoods of these indigenous communities. The Adivasi farmer households that Laya works with are experiencing erratic and untimely rainfall, long dry periods, short, sharp winters, and extreme events faced by increasing climate variability. These areas that Laya has worked at over the last decade has experienced 8 such different incidences of extreme events. Reports also indicate that there has been a gradual loss of biodiversity and forest cover. Many of the perennial streams are seen to be getting drier with every passing year. The development narrative of the tribal communities is worth considering, given the already existing levels of marginalization of these communities. And climate change tends to impact those very communities that we work with. Next slide. However, from a practical perspective, this story of change of Laya illustrates 3 identified key interventions of resilience. 1, we have good practices in sustainable farming, leading to food and income security. Locally relevant, climate-friendly and low-carbon technologies that enhance the quality of life, and climate change education that inculcates learning processes for the development of and the capacities of these communities for informed choices on matters related to their well-being. But today we will just focus on the first 2, that is good practices in sustainable farming and supportive technologies. So the case study and the work that we have done illustrates and analyzes the insights gained through interventions which play a vital role in addressing climate change and sustainable development, and hence builds resilience to these communities. So how do we know at Laya's end and at INEC's end, what are these good practices in sustainable farming? From our experience and from the community, it has been that these are some of the key indicators that they have adopted. And they address food and income security. They are low external inputs, low investment, and reasonable returns. They ensure ecological sustainability. And in keeping with the indigenous culture and ethos and traditional knowledge systems. These processes are easy to adopt, they're easy to scale up, and they're easy to replicate. The community feels confident with these kinds of interventions. And the practice of these interventions continue despite withdrawal of support from the funding agencies. If you look at the locally relevant, climate-friendly and low-carbon technologies, we have an abundance of natural resources in these areas that can be leveraged to benefit the local communities. At a time when increasing access to modern energy services is seen as a key development priority, as we attempt to achieve the sustainable development goals in the context of a changing climate, we at Laya and INEC believe that contextual and locally relevant approaches to energy and development is needed. The transition to clean energy, community-owned energy systems can support the building of resilient and robust communities. And we have seen this in our area. If you look at the slide, these technologies refer to a package of decentralized, adapted or locally developed systems that address the basic development needs of these communities. The technologies promoted by LAYA are based on a participatory energy needs assessment and subsequent feasibility studies, which focus on clean cooking, clean potable water, and irrigation needs. So to conclude, for us at LAYA and at INEC, building community resilience in a climate changing environment in this context, it is fraught with constraints and potentials. Building true community resilience in the sense of the word implies touching various dimensions of life of these indigenous societies, which touch upon food security, income enhancement, access to quality education and health, access to improved infrastructure, while also safeguarding the cultural wisdom and the ethos of these communities. However, these interventions need to be upscaled, they need to be made more accessible, and they need to be more replicated so that the impact of these technological interventions as well as farming interventions will create a large-scale impact on the communities that we work with. And for this is what we're looking at when we talk about locally developed choices of these communities to get better voice in all the platforms that are available and possible. Thank you.
Thanks, Myron. Nakul?
Thank you, Dr. Karge, and our friend from LAYA, Mr. Myron. Okay, fine. Thank you, audience, for coming in, and I will start with a brief introduction about Climate Action Network South Asia. We are a part of the CAN International Consortium, and we are around 300 plus organizations in South Asia. So, feel free to have a chat after this discussion. But just to, coming back to the topic of prioritizing local actions and the choices in South Asia, I would not take much of the time. I think the background given by Dr. Karge and by Myron explains us a lot of things in terms of, what is the basic agenda of how local actions and local, prioritization is most important in the current scenario for us to, really come up with very meaningful and very precise set of nationally determined contribution and, have a transparent mechanism to follow up on, what has been done practically on ground. Besides, with that background, I think I would like to give a very, brief background on the fact that about the situation that we are all living in. It's a known fact that in the last couple of years we have witnessed events which we haven't seen in the last 100 or 200 years. COVID was, one of those events where we witnessed that most of the livelihood options that people had, they had to leave those livelihood options. We also witnessed migration, not only happening from rural to urban areas, but from urban areas to rural areas. We call it reverse migration because everything was shut down. Most of the cities were locked down. All of that had impacts on people's health, livelihood, mental health, and a lot of issues. The slide here very well represents that, COVID, climate change, and conflict. We are living in a world where we are also facing conflict in parts of the world we haven't, anticipated. in the last couple of years. So these are 3 C's which we have witnessed, and I think in the last couple of years what we have seen is that they have undone the benefits of what we have attained in the last couple of decades. So you can very well see on the map that pre-COVID period in South Asia there was 49 approximately million of people, those who are living below poverty line, and now these people have gone beyond around 10 to 15% more, which is around 56%. So this explains a lot. Socio-economy in South Asia, it's very clearly that South Asia is one of the regions where we see a lot of people, those who are living at below $1 per day. 43% of the global people in South Asia live on that standards. We see that most of the South Asian economy is agri-based economy. So it fundamentally depends on rains, on how temperature takes its tolls, on how changing temperature takes its toll, so on and so forth. So for much of a rain, less of a rain, too much of rain, late rain, earlier rain, everything takes a toll on agriculture output, and then indirectly to the economies and to the final budget of the family that we live in South Asia. 70% of our people in South Asia depend on the rural economy. Timely rains decide, what is the family budget. So bad monsoon in our part of the world means that we have higher food inflation rates across the year we have to face. So these are examples and background of what the situation that we have to face regionally and what the most of the poorest of people, poor people have to face. Agriculture production, as I've explained, is the mainstay of the economy for most of the poorest of the poor people. I just want to also highlight that how small the land holdings are. The average size of land holding in Bangladesh is around 0.5 hectares. So global standard is around 2 hectares for small scale farmers. In Bangladesh, it is around 0.5 hectares. In India, it is less than 2 hectares, around 1.4 hectares. In Sri Lanka, it is even lesser, 0.8. Nepal, 93% of farmer families, we don't have average figure, but are small scale farmers. 58% farmers in Pakistan are small scale farmers. So, the point I want to make with all that of background is that, we are seeing climate change. We are seeing the fluctuation in temperature. We are seeing abrupt patterns of rainfall, so on and so forth. Disasters are happening, landslide, flash floods are happening. And then they have their own set of direct impacts, both on health, agriculture, productivity, and various other parameters. So the point is that, in the last couple of years, we talk a lot about at national policy level, we in India, Dr. Kharge gave the example of India, we had an agriculture mission, smart agriculture mission. We have an enhancement of income mission through agriculture livelihood back home in most of the South Asian countries. The situation we are in is that, leave aside enhancement. We are finding it difficult with COVID, climate change, and conflict to even maintain those income levels, those marginal income levels. And that's what has been depicted by various surveys, by studies that poverty and its impacts on SDGs. All SDGs from SDG 1 to 7 are directly impacted. SDGs 11, 13, and 16 are indirectly impacted by higher poverty rates and impacts on income and so on and so forth. So I think the point is that we want to make in why local determined contributions are so important is that because that's where most of the action would be happening. A country can come up with n number of policy documents, at national level. We have in India our nationally determined contribution. Similarly, in Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, everyone has submitted their NDCs. But at the end of the day, action will happen not only not at the national level, not at subnational level. It will happen at the minutest scale, and those scale are very important. I'll give you again example of India. And then I'll come on to the other South Asian and our fellow brothers and sisters in Nepal, is that, we have a very common governance structure in most of the South Asian countries, which is called district, which is even, one tranche below the subnational level. So that is the level, and even beyond that, the panchayat level, these are the level where convergence of all policy should happen. These are the levels where water, access to energy, agriculture, pollution, all of these, decision makings are done by a government officer. So these are the level where all of the action should happen, also all of the decentralization of decisions should happen. And I think with having said that, there have been multiple research and impetus been given by CANSA members with various research organizations across South Asia that the need for localized action is very important. And one such publication you can see on the screen is by our partner organization Prakritik PRC Nepal, which very clearly advocates what are the gaps and what are the solutions. You can very well see on the screen that there are some adaptation actions which could be taken at local level, and there are some mitigation actions. For an example, for mitigation actions, there are actions on how decentralization of renewable energy can happen. This decentralization of renewable energy, as my colleague from Laya was mentioning, does not only saves and gives the assurity on energy access and SDGs, it also saves a lot of carbon footprint when you lay down a transmission line from a centralized generation power plant to the point of consumer. Similarly, I'll just complete. Similarly, on the adaptation actions, there are multiple actions which have been suggested by various speakers. There are actions which are like capacity building, which are like communicating. What actually action on ground should look like. People at village level, at community level, do not understand the international jargon on climate negotiations. So we need to desimplify and we need to make them understand, okay, in their understanding, how do climate action, sustainability, makes it impacts on day-to-day basis. So with that, I think the only fact and issue that I want to mention is that this is the last slide. Sorry, I'm taking a bit of a time. But I think we need to be vocal for local, and we need to highlight the fact that, at the end of the day, you cannot make policies in silo. You have to get out, you have to make, people understand that within a radius of 50 kilometers, you have a specific geography and you have to make solutions for your own your problems should have very generic solutions for your own set of problems. So with that, I'll summarize and not explain this slide because of shortage of time. Thank you.
Thank you, Nakul. Yeah, Martin, I'll operate the slides.
No.
Yeah.
Thank you, Priya. Hello, everyone. My name is Martin. I'm a member of German Watch. We're a German NGO based in Berlin and Bonn. I'm happy to come in after my colleagues here have raised such important points. They gave striking accounts of the challenges that we face, but also, I think, gave comprehensive and exciting overviews on what we can do and how it can be achieved. And I'll try to, after we talked so much about locality, is it loud enough? Better? Okay, sorry. So after we talked so much about local ambitions and the necessity to raise voices locally and push for initiatives that are rooted in localities, I'll try to make a jump, if you will, to a higher level where finance nowadays usually originates, which is the international or at least national level, which is part of the problem that we're facing at the moment. So yeah, I'll give a short input based on some joint work that we've been doing, conducting over the past 3 years in this project with partners from Asia, among them Laya, which is here on the panel, Myron, Priya, but also Bangladesh, China, and Indonesia. We've been trying to push the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank to transform itself. AIIB for short, is an international financial institution, a multilateral bank which is funded by many governments all over the world and with public money, and thus it has a strong mandate to benefit the public at large diligently and without discrimination. So our goal was to transform this bank, to make it align itself with the goals of the Paris Agreement of 2015, to fulfill a responsibility that multilateral banks in general have as role models in financing innovative projects that address the needs of local communities. And they are falling far short is what we know, and what is something that needs to be addressed. Even though AIIB and many other multilateral banks have pledged to align themselves with the Paris Agreement by mid-2023, so next year. In a study we published this year, we tested how AIIB was doing in terms of financing projects in urban areas. We looked at financing by AIIB that was part of its urban sector strategy, and we looked at the strategy itself. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry, go back 2 slides. One more?
Yep.
That's the one, thank you. To do this assessment, we created a tool set to look at the projects and the policies of the bank. This toolset was based on 7 transformative principles, which were in turn backed by a range of criteria, up to 30. And the principles included key motives to be considered when funding new infrastructure investments in urban areas, but also in other sectors. And they included decarbonization, they included resilience, they included the impacts on nature and biodiversity, but also social dimensions such as vulnerability and inclusivity. And in fact, this toolset was created with the urban setting in mind, but it can be applied to other sectors as well. And this is something that we want to stress here, that it's something that can be taken to different contexts to be employed to assess and to give local actors something to use to push for a stronger pursuit of these transformative principles. So to underline the importance of well-informed projects and the key impacts that are generated when local knowledge and expertise is involved in designing these local solutions, we included 30 good practice examples from a range of Asian countries. And I'd encourage any one of you to check them out as well when looking up the toolset. It's a good resource, really gives a nice overview. You can find it online on the German Watch website if you Google my name. So to give you an example of the assessments that we've run, next slide, Priya. Thank you. We applied this tool set to the urban sector strategy, and as you can see on the right-hand side that the 7 principles there with the underlying criteria, so that's why there's so many lines with checks in either of the boxes. You can make out that yellow is a dominant color in this scheme, and the reason for this is that many of our guiding principles, which we've developed, which we've consulted with partners in Asia in various contexts, are not being addressed. There's plainly no assessment possible of these, in our minds, essential criteria that need to be met, or at least to be checked when developing projects. And as far as we can tell, at least going by the sector strategy for urban development at AIIB, a lot is being overlooked. Next slide, please, Priya. Thank you. So, in conclusion, financial institutions like AIIB are largely disconnected from circumstances of the local constituencies, the people who are meant to be the beneficiaries of the infrastructure that's being financed. And it takes 3 things in my eyes to change this, and we need to change it fast. So one is more pressure from peers. We need other financial institutions that go ahead and align their policies and financing activities with the Paris Agreement. This includes the direct peers of AIIB, other multilateral banks, but also national and bilateral banks, and even subnational financial actors. In total, international financial institutions need to act and align themselves diligently with the Paris Agreement. Secondly, we need more pressure. Pressure from civil society, jointly exerted from the ground up and within national and local contexts. To achieve this, civil society and local groups need to be put in the position to succeed, and we hope to contribute to this with our study and the tools that it contains. And lastly, we need to bridge the contribute to this with our study and the tools that it contains. And lastly, we need to bridge the
Mics.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes. My question is to Myron on the Nepal case. You mentioned as being a good example of utilizing local circumstances in writing their NDC. So for someone, for me, that is interested in studying about NDCs, whether quantification of reductions or the text itself, the language used, what are other cases beside Nepal you would think are a good example of utilizing local circumstances?
Nepal, did you say Nepal?
Yeah,
Can you
that question is for Nakul.
Nakul.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think there are multiple examples while you study, quantification of NDCs. As Myron has told that these case studies of local contributions are happening in each and every, subnational level and district level we have spoke. There are organizations which are working on drafting district climate resilience plans. So within India, you can refer and Google it. There are multiple organizations. Those are helping state governments, subnational governments, district authorities to frame these action plans. Not only from a climate lens, but from a disaster resilience lens, integrating both climate and disasters, and also maintaining the gender aspect of it and the child-centric aspect of, how you contribute and make sure that these, vulnerable communities are not left alone. So parallel to that, there are multiple, case studies within Nepal, within Sri Lanka, within Pakistan. These things are happening.
Thank you for the answer.
Can you just pass them?
Hello, thank you for all three presenters for the excellent presentation. This is Praveen from Prakriti Resource Center, Nepal. Special thanks to Nakul for sharing the publications that I co-authored with some of my colleagues in PRC. In the publications, what we have done is that local government has a legal and constitutional mandates and also the certain capacities. So we look after those things, and there is a bucket list that NDC has, right? So among the bucket list of the NDCs, what are the specific actions that local governments can do in terms of their legal mandates and in terms of their capacity? So those assessments were made, and we have made some specific actions in the context of Nepal, what the local government should do, should contribute in terms of NDC implementation. So the publication is about the local actions. And we realized that when we are working with the whole localization concept of the NDCs, there are certain advantages that localization has provided in the NDC implementation. First is that it will give a more accurate information regarding the vulnerability and also what actually the need is. Because once you downscale to the lower level, the accuracy is high, right? So that's the one advantage. Second advantage is that you can make the local government accountable compared to the federal or the provincial governments, because the local governments are more close to the peoples, and peoples have a direct access to the local government rather than the federal government.
That's
right. So these are some of the elements that we found that is very important for the implementations of any projects and also the NDCs. And so what we are doing is, and there are some resources available in the local government as well. So why not to tap those resources that will supplement the international finance that is coming up for the NDC implementation. So these are some advantages that we have. And what we are now asking is that more of the climate finance should go to the local levels, because that's where the implementation really lies. So with that, I just add on what Nakul has just shared in terms of that. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mike.
And I think that has been similar to our experience in India also, that we are getting a better sense of local vulnerabilities, and some very innovative solutions are emerging which can solve other communities' problems also. Yes, please.
Thank you so much. I would like to commend all of you for a beautiful presentation and so educative. I am from Nigeria, a local community, a local farming community. We used to be dryland environment, even though we're still dryland environment. But then we are faced with great challenge of flooding within the grassroots. And I feel like the government are just folding their arms, waiting for the disaster. There are no plans for pre-disaster. They are much more concerned about the post-disaster. I happens to be a victim. In 2020, when I was a student, I took loan to invest in rice farming to earn a living. And flood water come away and wash everything, leaving me with nothing, which is very difficult for a student who has to pay back the money. So that is why I said we need to do something. And this presentation put me through calling the attention of the traditional leaders and the local communities to come up with things like this. And as you mentioned rightly, the climate finances should go directly to the victims, the frontline communities, from my community. I will be happy if maybe I'll get something to take home and put it through to them, maybe the local community. This is what we should be doing by ourselves because the government are not ready to see us through. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Any other questions, comments? Myron, you want to respond to that? That we have a couple of minutes. You can, that's what announce.
You can meet us at, we have an exhibition booth at stall, booth number 46 till tomorrow. So we'd happy to meet you over there.
You have a question?
I am John Paul Bai. I'm from Sierra Leone. I work for the Sierra Leone Land Alliance. My own take is on the NDC for NGOs in Africa. Now, we did a study in Sierra Leone to actually field test in terms of knowledge base on the review of the NDC for Sierra Leone.
Okay.
We realized that 86% of NGOs are unaware about the NDC review processes.
Yeah.
In terms of knowledge gap,
Yeah.
90%, most of those in rural areas, community-based organization,
Correct.
they are completely left out.
Yeah.
And then when we went further in terms of consultation by governments, we understand that just 15% NGOs that go along what they do are consulted. Now, one of the provisions in Sierra Leone's NDC, why we think it is an affront to us as NGO, is the fact that the level of deforestation in Sierra Leone is going on abysmally to a point that all the reserves, forests, have been encroached upon 34%. And we see governments aiding and abetting Chinese companies coming in almost all of our reserves. In just 2020, $4.5 billion timber logging was reported. So we think as NGO, there is need for us to push for participation in the review process of the NDC in Sierra Leone. Otherwise, all our forests in the next 10 years will be gone. And that's why I'm here.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that input, which also adds to our conviction that we are on the right track in focusing on local action to contribute more to NDC. We are trying to do advocacy in our country, India, but as I said, we have started talking with other developing countries, and it's good to hear that this concept is resonating with all of you in Africa. Do connect with us and we would be happy to share our experiences and hopefully learn from all of you also. So with that, our time for our part of this session is over. I would like to hand over to Dr. Linda Stevenson of Asia Pacific Network for Global Change Research for the second part of this side event. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Affairs. The key head of this particular session was unable to join us today in person, so he has recorded his video presentation. We will share that with you. Having said that, I would like to talk a little bit and set the scene, if you like, for this particular session. So, the agenda at hand, addressing heat equity through vulnerable community-focused heat adaptation plans. So raising heat stress is a global climate hazard and is a silent disaster. Heat stress-induced deaths in year 2100 are estimated to be above 100 per 100,000 in lower income groups. In addition to their profound impacts on health, heat waves also pose significant economic and non-economic impacts, affecting livelihoods and productivity. Lost productivity from heat stress is valued at 4.2 trillion US dollars by 2030. So the impacts of heat stress are more severe in urban areas due to the urban heat island effect. Urban slums, which are most vulnerable to heat stress, are concentrated in cities. Lost productivity and health impacts of heat stress will drive more inequality in developing countries of the world. So this session focuses on the impacts of heat stress on vulnerable communities, heat adaptation needs and solutions to address heat equity from global south and north, heat adaptation needs and solutions to address heat equity from global south and north, happy to say that APN, as an intergovernmental regional network, supports the work of heat stress in urban environments, and currently we are doing work in India, in Thailand, and in China. I won't talk about that today, we don't have the time, but I have a lot of business cards. Please feel free to approach me. In terms of our minute-to-minute agenda, I would really like to introduce our speakers today. I hope you are all here. I haven't met you, so I'm not sure, but I really would love to invite you all up. I'd love to invite Mr. Santiago Alba Corral, the Director of the International Development Research Center, or IDRC. I would like to invite Mr. Rohit Magotra is not here. He will join us via video. I would like to invite Ms. Bijal Brahmbat of the Mahila Housing Trust. Are you here? Fantastic. Please join us. Oh, we saw each other this morning. And I'd also like to invite Mrs. Rajeshwari Parikh. I'm so sorry for my awful pronunciation. I really need to take lessons in that. So these will be our key speakers today. I hope that we can take up the full 45 minutes. I will try and pose some questions to you as well, if time permits. And of course, we need the audience to participate. So with that, I would love to invite Mr. Santiago Alba Corral. Oh, I'm sorry. Just before I do that, we do have opening remarks from IRADE by the Executive Director, Dr. Jyoti Parikh. We'll have a 2-minute video. I'm so sorry. So bear with us. Thank you so much.
Hello and good afternoon. Welcome to this session on heat equity and climate action. I'm Jyoti Parikh, Executive Director of Integrated Research for Action and Development.
Volume?
Hello and good afternoon. Welcome to this session on heat equity and climate action. I'm Jyoti Parikh.
So we need the
Executive
volume
Director
for
of
the video.
Integrated Research
If you can
for Action
manage
and
that,
Development,
thank you.
IRADE. We work on energy, climate change, urban development, poverty, gender equity, agriculture, food security, which are some of the challenges of the 21st century. IRADE also works on climate change issues from holistic perspective, covering aspects of climate mitigation, adaptation, climate negotiations. We address them with global, national and state level perspectives, along with sectoral details, namely power, transport, industry, agriculture and household sectors from various perspectives. IRADE was designated as a Center of Excellence by the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, Government of India. I have personally been involved with climate change issues just before the Rio Convention in 1992 and attended many COP meetings and have been involved also as convening or lead author of the second IPCC, third and also fifth IPCC. I see the issue becoming bigger and complex with passing years and affects now every citizen, rich or poor, every region, Himalayas, island or desert, and every sector, power, transport, industries, housing and so on. In this session, my colleague Rohit Magotra and his team, especially Ananya Bhatia, present their work done for IDRC and APN about how heat stress affects cities and how it has to be addressed through early warning system, capacity building as well as system strengthening. Actions are needed at home, ward, city, national and global levels. I hope you enjoy what they present. I thank the panelists for consenting to be here and especially Santiago Corral and Linda Stevenson, who has also funded the studies from IDRC and APN. I thank Leah, our co-host, especially Myron Mendes. Most of all, I thank all of you for being there and regret our absence due to mishap, due to despite booking flights and hotels. Irade thanks you all again and hope you enjoy the session. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Dr. Jyoti Parikh. It's always great to have APN recognized for the work that it funds. With this, I would love to invite Mr. Santiago Alba Corral. I'm sorry if I don't pronounce your name properly. He is the director of the International Development Research Center, IDRC, to inaugurate this session. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. No, you said my name perfectly, actually. So, and we all actually have names that are worth just destroy them sometimes. So that's beautiful. And I'm not the director of the center. I'm the director of the Climate Resilient Food Systems program of the center. I don't want anyone believing that I'm taking my boss's boss job. We are so happy to be here with you today. For the ones that don't know, IDRC, we are a crown corporation. We are part of the Government of Canada efforts to support responses to international development crisis, and in particular, IDRC has the mandate to support research and solutions in the Global South by the Global South and by the researchers and experts. So the opening remarks, a little bit the conversation, I want to talk specifically about why IDRC funded this initiative, but what we have learned from this initiative. And I don't want to go into details of what Irede has done, but I think we go back to what is the problem that we want to solve and what we learned during the last 3 years. We know IPCC estimates rising global temperature is already increasing the amount of severity of heat waves. In India, in particular, the heat waves are exacerbated by urban health island effect, with a considerable impact on the health of vulnerable people. In particular, we know that when we talk about vulnerable people, we talk about women and girls in even higher. According to the Indian Meteorological Department in 2015, more than 2,400 people died for heat related. So IDRC supported this project to address some of the gaps that are related to that, despite of the projections that we have on climate models, on warning systems, and increasing the frequency of the extreme heat events, we don't have enough public recognition of the magnitude of the problem, and the recognition of the data that we have is not enough. So during 3 years, a project called the Heat Streets Climate Adaptive Action Plan project influenced and informed policies at the municipal level that will benefit thousands of people. IDRC was very happy to collaborate on the project with the extraordinary impact, not only on municipalities, on the systems, on the process, on the training, on the capacity building tools, the communication approaches, and overall the scale on the early awareness systems. This was something that the project gave us that is extremely important when we do these kind of initiatives in the climate crisis that we are. It was a balanced portfolio of research, training, policy influencing, and public awareness. In particular, I want to commend the work that has been done, because beyond the municipal scope of the project, the teams contributed to an extensive production of scientific peer review documentation and publications, but also mass media publication, both at regional, national, and global levels, reaching policymakers and citizens, translating research into evidence that is based .
Thank you so much, Mr. Corral, and apologies for promoting you perhaps before your time. Okay. Next, we'll show you a video. Mr. Rohit Magocha unfortunately couldn't make it. I think a lot of folk have experienced some trouble trying to get to Sharm el-Sheikh this week, and he is one of them. However, he has recorded his presentation, and we will show that now on video. Thank you so much.
Vulnerable community focused with adaptation plans. It's a code red for the planet, as we all know that incidents of heat are becoming frequent, intense, and longer. The last 6 years, the warmest year, goes to the heat wave events globally. And while we look at South Asia, it is one of the most vulnerable regions in the world, which is being impacted and likely to be impacted by the heat waves in the future. What we observe that it's not just a rise in number of heat waves, but also rise in consecutive number of hot days and hot nights, which is leading to increase in the heat stress. Unlike cyclones and floods, heat stress is a silent disaster and has been one of the topmost natural disaster killer in cities. We find that global heat-related deaths have increased by 66% in last 2 decades. And further, the cities are particularly vulnerable to the heat stress impacts because of the high density urban heat islands, concentrated slums, and low coping capacity of the vulnerable urban poor. So the impacts have been immense, and what is being reported is just a tip of iceberg. The number of deaths which are caused by the heat waves are quite high compared to what they are being reported. It's because that we don't have established monitoring frameworks to record the mortality due to heat waves. Particularly the Chicago heat waves triggered the significance of developing heat adaptation plans. So in just a period of 5 days, there were 739 deaths in Chicago. And further in India, the 2010 heat waves where high number of deaths were attributed to the heat waves, triggered the heat action plan for the city of Ahmedabad. What we see is that in South Asia, Karachi is the only city which has a heat action plan, which was again triggered by high number of deaths happening in very short duration time of 3 days in 2015. So further, there has been increased focus on developing heat action plans because of rise in mortality. What examples are for and few? There are several cities, states, and countries which don't have their heat action plans. So it's increasingly important to devise and develop heat action plans. So IRADE, with support of IDRC, initiated work on developing climate adaptive heat action plans in 2016. So we initiated work with cities of Rajkot, Bhubaneswar, and Delhi, which are extremely affected due to the heat stress. But the purpose was to bring to the forefront the importance of heat stress and also the adaptation measures which are required to climate-proof the cities from the impact of rising heat. The framework which we have developed, it reduces first the evidence of rising heat in the city. So we produce evidence looking at the climatology of the cities, and that's where the informed evidence become the basis of the seriousness of the city authorities to look at heat as a critical issue. Further, the important focus of our action plan is on identifying where are these urban heat islands in these cities. It's a differential, when we see there is a differential variation in the temperature where certain parts of the cities are cooler compared to other areas, and the parts which are hotter compared to the average reported temperature within the city. So we map these heat islands within the city through remote sensing and GIS. We produce the ward level maps delineated, which are the wards which are most affected, which lie in these zones, which are the heat stress zones or the urban heat island zones of the city. And further, we identified the low-income groups' habitations in these areas, which form the basis of understanding, where which first is that which area that the which wards are affected by higher temperatures, which are the urban islands, and the communities which for which a targeted action is required. So we undertook a vulnerability assessment of the wards which are showing high vulnerability. So this was done on the various factors like the housing type, the kind of roofs they have, the access to water facilities, access to electricity, awareness about the heat stress, health facilities. So based on which we created the vulnerability profile and also identified what kind of adaptive actions are required. So it's at particularly at the ward level, at the hotspot level, we identified the adaptive action. So we also observed that the differential impacts of heat on the gender. So what we found is that heat exhaustion is much more in women and children compared to the outdoor workers. So this is something which came out of the study, that it's because of the housing design, housing type, and also the limited adaptive measures, they are suffering more because of the heat within the household, and also the increased responsibility and the burden on the women due to the rise in the heat. So to summarize, what are the key heat equity factors which we observe and which needs to be addressed while looking at focused heat action plans? A is that the lowest income groups, they are the most affected due to the limited coping mechanisms. The awareness is low about the heat stress. It's not considered serious. And again, the economic ability to adopt cooling solutions by these communities is low. The nature of roofing material like tin, asbestos, cemented, the lack of ventilation and housing design. So a lot of issues are also on the kind of housing they live in. So the interventions are required around that. Again, other key factors is the water, access to the water and clean drinking water, the power cuts, so the sanitation facilities, and again losses due to their absence at workplace and loss of livelihoods. So these are critical issues to be addressed. There is not much of focus in existing heat action plan on the scene. So while we propose that this should be an important component of the heat action plans. Other important component where we looked at is that the outreach, how to enhance outreach to the vulnerable communities. So we have engagement with the medical stakeholders, the doctors, the pharmacists, the nurses, as well as the frontline ASHA workers who were actually trained to identify the heat stress cases early, diagnose, and also kind of create active mechanism for monitoring and reporting these cases for the treatment of the same. So a lot of engagement was done with the hospitals and medical authorities, particularly focusing on the primary health centers who are the access points of the vulnerable groups for heat-related treatments. So this is just one photograph which shows these trainings. Early warning is very critical. So we worked with the cities of the Rajkot to identify the threshold at what temperature the warning should be given for the early warning can be provided. So based on assessment, we devised new threshold for the city, so which enable the early action, and a lot of engagement was done by the city authorities, and also emphasis on the monitoring mortality and hospital admissions. So a lot of these actions were done, which were particularly focused on the low-income groups by the Department of Health, and then dissemination of heat stress advisory, making them aware about the impact of the heat stress, like the water points, at bus terminals, the open areas, construction areas. So a lot of these interventions were done, which were completely targeted at ward level and for the local communities. And the advisories were dispersed by the health workers as well as by the community volunteers, uh, engaging with them and uh, providing them to interpret their symptoms. So this has been a very targeted and focused effort by the municipal corporations while we work with them. So I think the obvious benefits which we observed is that the early warnings led to preparedness and early action, and these were targeted and focused and solutions for the poor, depending on their vulnerability. Uh, it prepares the hospitals and the health center, and it helps in reducing not only mortality but also the economic losses associated with the heat stress. So the kind of results which we have seen in India are immensely impressive. So in 2016, NDMA issued guidelines on devising heat action plans and engaged with several states and cities to devise their heat action plans. And IMD had a very critical role in setting up the mechanisms for heat, early warning and dissemination. So because of this engagement, we observed that even with a rise in number of heat wave days, but mortality has declined since 2015. So it's really it showcases the effectiveness of these detection plans. So we hope that this could be further adopted, and taking this approach further, we supported by Asia Pacific Network of Global Change Research (APN). We have took this model and engaged with 3 more cities in South Asia, Surat, Rajshahi, and Colombo, in partnership with UH.
Okay, thank you so much. And again, Mr. Mohit Magotra sends his sincere apologies. He's very sad that he can't make it to his session today. Let's now move on to Ms. Bijal Brahmbad of the Mahila Housing Trust for your intervention. Thank you. She will talk about heat adaptation solutions for the vulnerable poor.
I work with an organization called Mahila Housing Trust, which works with poor women in the informal sector in India across almost 8 to 9 states. We primarily used to work, as our name elaborates, for developing better housing and habitats for poor women. And also because most of these women are home-based workers or waste pickers, say for example, they use their house as a place of work. So it's a production house, it's a go down, it's a storehouse. And these houses are extremely poor, with poor material, tin sheet roofing, cement sheet roofing, which actually increases the temperature much more, 5 to 6 degrees inside the housing as compared to outside. That's when we realized that climate change is actually going to increase this kind of slow onset but potent disaster, like say heat stress or water scarcity, which we need to address for our members. And we started discussing climate change with them. And what we realized was that, because they were poor, their energies were focused to looking at where will I get the fees for my schools, for my child's education, or probably where I would get the next meal. And so climate change was something they were most uninterested in. Secondly, it was too technical for them to be able to understand. So we had to in fact start with explaining to them, trying to devise extremely, simple and very creative communication material around climate change to explain the concepts. But what really got them interested was the fact that they did not want their children to live the kind of lives that they were leading. And so that really got them interested. And so with the help of the, some very good communication and training material that we had developed, we sort of started working with them on helping them to assess their own vulnerabilities, especially in terms of heat, how it was impacting their livelihoods, their quality of life, the loss that they were experiencing, also probably some of the damages because they were incurring increasing expenditure in terms of housing maintenance and housing utilities. So we help them assess those vulnerabilities related to heat, and then also started to develop action plans with their support. So one of the plans that they came up with was that they wanted their houses, which were also their workplaces, to be much, much cooler, and which is where we also actually partnered with technologists to have cool roofing solutions, which they adopted for their homes, and then also probably, and what was interesting to us was that the learning was mutual. So it was not merely the women who were learning, but also the technologists. For example, they told the technologists that while they did like the roof, and how did they want to adopt it is the fact that we actually trained them to install temperature loggers inside their houses, take the readings and then compare it to the readings with the meteorological department, and that's when they understood that the roof is actually really cooling their houses. But they went back to the technologist saying that they wanted to use the roof as a terrace. So in very hot countries across the global south, poor people especially they do not have the money to use ACs, and so they use terraces to sleep on top during the hot season. And the way that roof was initially did not allow them to use it like a terrace to sleep on the rooftop, or perhaps fly kites during the kite flying festival. And so they wanted it much flatter, and that was the message that we took back to the technologist on their behalf, and he changed the technology, and that's when it got adopted, and they started taking credit for actually adopting the cool roofing solutions. Rohit Bhai was talking about action plans in India, in our country, around heat. And most early level heat action plans in India do talk of early warning systems and are very closely related to hospital readiness for heat. And what our women did when we started working with them on cooling solutions, they actually sort of organized themselves and went to the policy makers to say that our heat action plans should not only talk of early warning systems or hospital readiness, but it should also have cooling plans as a part of the city heat action plans. They also said that we could perhaps look at greening at an entire city level to reduce the heat island impact. And that's when we learned that the heat action plans actually really need to broaden their scope to include probably the green areas of the city, also include how the city infrastructure is being built so that it's much cooler or gives less carbon emissions. And also look at the entire city plan rather than only looking at probably early warning systems or hospital readiness. Was something that we were able to influence our cities with. In India, currently we also have a very big affordable housing program going on through our own affordable housing mission of the government of India. And we realized that it and we did have energy conservation codes, but those codes were not applicable to housing below 250 square meters. And the housing that we were doing as a part of that mission was merely 25 square meters. So we also understood that the codes, the way they are designed currently in most developing countries, are for a most ideal situation, which may not necessarily apply to the poor who are in the informal sector, who probably also build incrementally or probably are living in very small housing spaces given by the government and therefore we also need to, also one big issue with the kind of codes that we are having is that because they are pitched most, ideally, the costs would increase by, so for example, an affordable housing mission, the cost would increase by 25 to 30%. And the energy code comes from the energy ministry, and then you have the housing ministry, which is, has the mandate to build affordable housing. So the two ministries don't necessarily talk to each other because they are supposed to deliver their programs within their given budgets. Therefore, this may sound a bit challenging, but we have now started talking of designing graded codes. So not having one simple code for the entire country, but you could look at incremental codes which are cheaper and look at housing designs for the poor, emphasizing on passive designing, or also on stuff like orientation, and especially cheaper and user-friendly marketable. So material which is very, very much accessible from the market is something that we are looking at. Very recently, because we also realized that there was a huge loss of income for our informal sector women, probably they said their productivity reduced by 1/3 in the heat season as compared to in the normal season. We have started looking at heat insurance for the poor and women in urban areas, along with insurance for excessive rain, where we are working with a company called Global Parametrics and trying to design heat insurance for poor women in informal sector. My colleague Raji probably would add a sentence or two on that.
Okay, so with that, thank you so much. Thank you for bringing the water as well. That was so sweet. Thank you so much. So Mrs. Rajeshwari Parikh will now talk a little bit more and extend the conversation. Please take the floor.
Really sorry we are missing Irade team, Rohit Bhai and his colleagues. It would have been really good to have them here and share their learnings. That's great work they're doing for Indian cities, and there's so much learning to take across the region and in fact into the world. And really unfortunate that they're missing this. I am a wildcard entry into this talk. But I will extend Bijal Ben's discussion about how we are working with the urban poor. So we are currently implementing a project called the Climate Risk Insurance for excess heat and excess rain. One of the reasons why we wanted a financial solution to climate stresses was more and more heat is turning to be a risk for the poor. So they're losing incomes, they have to spend more to keep themselves well or to take care of their assets or to protect themselves. So unless we had a financial product, whatever awareness that you do, or whatever activities that you do at small scale are not going to make a big amount of difference. And so we got into this project. So when we talk about climate risk insurance, there are two important things. One is the technical aspect of it, where it requires building an index. You take climate data, historical data, study it, see how heat episodes happen, how long, how often, build an index and then do that. So that's the technical aspect. And in fact, the matching aspect of it is the social aspect. We actually need to see when we are doing something like this, and particularly if you're looking at excluded communities, vulnerable, even women for that matter, we really needed to understand the ground situation on what, these slow onset events like extreme heat does to the poor. And our aim, or we will say what we brought to the table in terms of the project was, we wanted to look at affordability, adequacy, and willingness. These three were important for us. Unless you examine these very closely with those who are actually, at the receiving end of this, I think it will not be a meaningful solution. And so, fine, and okay, you understood that you needed to look at adequacy, affordability, willingness. How do you do? And so, intuitively, you can say many things about the poor. Look, the poor, this is their situation and plight and all of that. But we said that we'll go out into the communities and really gather evidence. Unless we had evidence, talking intuitively that, the poor need this, require this, doesn't work. You needed actually hardcore data. And then that is when you can be very fine-tuned to designing solutions, or let us say giving policy inputs, or let us say devising market-based solutions. And so with our limited capacities, we did go out, we talked to the women, we did a socio-economic survey, and then we did a lot of focus group discussions. And the first thing we learned is it's really very difficult to talk about climate change to the poor, particularly women. They have overriding concerns, other than just asking how does it feel on a hot day, what is the impact of heat on you, they have more other developmental challenges. And so it becomes very difficult, and we had to really prod and ask questions in a way that they were willing to say, yes, I lost a few days of work. Look, I lost, I am now sleeping less because I am working in the night. In the mornings, I can't work. There's no comfort in the house. I can't sit outside and work. So I have to do my work in the night. And so when we asked these questions and we said, look, this is because of the heat, yeah, they were willing to say. But otherwise, our experience across has been that the poor are, particularly women, are inured to heat. They say it's okay, it's part of life. That's what we... And that's a big challenge that we all need to, tackle, I think. So that was one thing. And then when it came to expenses as well, they were not really able to articulate what are the expenses that actually shoot up when there is a climate stress. Now, once again, we had to ask them prodding questions. I mean, of course, some of them we imagine and we knew that this could be a case, but others we had to take lead on. Whatever they were telling, we add on and ask. For instance, simple thing that they needed cold water, to drink cold water to keep themselves comfortable in some. And the expense on cold water increased. Because they do not have refrigerators, they need to buy, something cold from, the street place. They could be 2 rupee pouches of water, they could be 10 rupee cold drink bottles, whatever. But, it was so essential for them to have to spend that. Imagine if someone was just earning 40 rupees and that person's 10 rupees had to go just to buy cold water. That's 1/4 of the expense. So they were not willing to actually say that we have expenses related because of a climate stress. And now when, these socioeconomic surveys was so difficult for us to actually make them talk and then from their answers to deduce that, look, this is because of heat. So that was, so clearly what we could see was that there was a loss in incomes and increase in expenditure. And now it's very easy to say this. It's common sense. When you have a stress episode, there is this. But we need numbers to work out affordability. We need to say what is the income that they have, what is the kind of expenditure that they have, and what is it that they can actually apportion towards managing a climate risk. Whether it is insurance, or whether it is savings, or hospital expenditure, whatever. But what is it? And so we did this and we did get a number, and I must tell you it's a double-digit number. And that's no joke, That's one thing. And when it came to, talking to women directly in a focus group discussion, we realized that, the non-economic stresses are becoming more and more. I mean, of course, the economic stresses are there, but non-economic stresses, for instance, women simply said that they don't anymore sell vegetables. we were talking to vegetable vendors, and they said that, we don't sell for almost like 1 to 2 months. And we should examine that, that takes away the agency of women. They are no more in a decision-making capacity. You have no income, you can't make decisions. Do we know that? I mean, when we asked, what do you do? I sit at home. When there's no income, they're compromising on many things, and we know that they're not able to take decisions that ideally you would have with a good income. Agency is being taken away, and it's no joke. I mean, then, of course, it was not a big study, but in the way they spoke, we could easily say. And the other thing that we found was that their care work burden was increasing. Women said that they would, in hot season when they made food early in the morning and then go to work, the food would spoil. So now we ask them, so what do you do? They say that, we cook when we have to eat. And our men and children come in the afternoons, and that is when we cook and eat. So which means that their work day is interrupted. If you had to work, let us say 4 hours non-stop, but you had a cooking responsibility and you could not do it, those days, it's gone. So, I think when we looked at the social aspect, it gave us insights into many such things. And I think we need to examine it from all these angles. And so what we are also trying to do from our previous experience and this experience, that, we need a lot of behavior change communication, not just, I think, for the communities that we are working with, but also those who provide solutions. Whether it is, let us say, the insurance sector, whether it is NGOs like us, or research organizations like IRADE, all of us, I think, need to learn as we go along. And with this, I stop and be ready to take questions.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that was amazing. Thank you for sharing that. Behavioral changes, I think, is key there, absolutely. We're actually out of time, but I do believe someone mentioned that we had the room until 6:30, so I'm going to take advantage of that just until we get kicked out. So if there are any questions from the floor, we'd be very happy to take 1 or 2. If not, then perhaps one of the effective strategies, in terms of enhancing heat equity is this whole behavioral change issue. So, what other effective strategies are there out there that could be utilized that we haven't actually talked about today? That could be utilized that we haven't actually talked about today?
Market is the best, medium or means for actually serving all. And if we do not have market ready, if we just have these little pilots here and there, it doesn't really work. So we need industry players, market, people to come. I mean, these are all pilots, but we really need to scale.
Absolutely. And capacity building requirements are key, I believe, to integrate heat equity, particularly in design and implementation of adaptation plans. And if any of you would like to speak to that before we finish for the day, that would be fantastic.
Well, I can try. I think I want to build actually on the market aspect, because I think the scalability of what we do is crucial. And the level of the crisis that we are facing and the urgency of responses require a level of capacity space where the the research translation, the policies, the environment also. And you were talking about the municipal policies. The interconnection of different policies is crucial, or we will be having housing policies that don't address climate issues or adaptation issues, or we will have adaptation programs that don't look at the housing crisis. I think that it needs to be recognized, and that's connected to the urgency and the dimension of the crisis. And I think those elements need to be there. And we have seen that actually in this, but I mean, all the examples that we are giving, we are responding to that element. That is not one agenda, the one that we are resolving. And I think the other key element that I think is the crisis, the climate crisis and the inequalities is part of the same crisis. They are not two problems that we are trying to solve. They are interconnected to a transformation of the system itself. And I think that is where actually the conversation is to be driven.
I agree with you that you made a very good point. I think slowly, because of work like the way Irade is doing, I think the binaries, we are moving away from binaries, this or that, We now talk this and that. I think that's really good. Thanks.
Okay, with that, I see people are coming into the room. I think possibly there's an event from 6:30. I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank all three of you. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank Anoki Parikh for her support. It's been fantastic. Thank you so much for helping organize this event. And to Mr. Bharat Chaturvedi, I'm sorry, Bharat, I can't pronounce your surname. I roped him in to helping me out today. He's my volunteer extraordinaire. Thank you so much. And I think he's captured some key messages from today's discussion that we'll take back to Rohit. And we will share some messages on social media. APN itself is supporting the project by Rojit. So we've also opened another call for proposals. If you're interested, I have cards with QR codes, and the call is open now, and it will be for funding from next year. So please feel free to grab me on the way out, take a card, and check the website. So with that, I will close this session. Thank you so much for joining us. Thanks to our speakers. Thanks to our volunteers and helpers. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Great session. Thank you.